Testing. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing. 6 minutes until we start this thingamadoody. So, I'm testing my audio for just a moment. Want to make sure that the sound is good. If you can hear me, say we can hear you. I see someone has said that already. Everyone else having any audio problems, let me know. Also, let me know if there's any swelling, chopping, and no, those aren't questions about personal issues. We're speaking strictly of audio here. So if you could let me know if you hear anything strange other than my normal strangeness, that would be great. Oh, because audio issues suck, and I would like for today to not suck. Matthew Pitts says, I heard you clear in the other room. Alright. It would seem as though the sound is working well today. This is good. This makes me happy. And a happy less is a productive less, and everyone wants me to be good. So, there we go. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until time. Do. Going to let this stream sit here and run for a couple minutes of that so that I can check and make sure my stream is solid and there is no swelling or chop. Solid stream with no swelling or chop. I sound like a urologist. Yay! And as is usually my ceremony before starting anything live, I get completely away from the art stuff for a minute and flex my fingers and get my mind on something else for the moment so I can clear it. So far, no sound issues. Four minutes until time. That's right. It's the pre-show elevator music. Oops. Alright, gonna kill the stream so we can start this up clean. Yeah. So far it doesn't seem like any audio issues. Gonna be a fun one today, so. Alright, here we go. Killing the stream in 3, 2, 1. Hasta All right, and we are back, 12:59, heading into 1 p.m. for yet another of our content artist development seminars. So, oh, so welcome back, everybody who is joining us for another week on this happy Good Friday. For those of us who celebrate that whole thing. What we are going into today is probably going to be one of the few times where we're not really going to touch DAZ Studio in the course of things. I'm going to be spending almost all of our time today inside the algorithmic suite of products, because that is kind of that's sort of the series that we're in right now, dealing with Substance, all the Substance suite. And just a lot of cool stuff inside that. Now, if you look at your screen right now, what you'll see is a really cool. I'm really digging this viewport. Just the display settings inside Substance Painter can actually look really gorgeous on their own. And if you remember last week, as an example, I had this tree, the little patch of ground that I was texturing and doing some stuff with, just as an introductory piece, walking into the Substance suite. And so since then, I actually haven't changed anything. What you see there is actually from last week, but this is just with some improved display settings and some little tweaks to that stuff to really show what a final render could look like. But you'll also see here that it's very much real-time display. It's really amazing how good that display is, and what all you can, how much you can see with that, and really gauge what your textures are doing. So, and I love that, because it just gives us this great method of preview and really being able to see where we're going with all that stuff. And it's very accurate to the results you can eventually get inside iRay. So, and so another subject with that, just a little aside, something that just popped into my head, but I want to make sure that I've said it. I know pretty much everyone watching is here for, for 3D content, for the primarily DAZ Studio, and to a lesser degree nowadays Poser markets. But since most of this stuff is dealing with physics-based rendering, PBR is the thing now, and dealing with that through iRay, I just wanted to make just a quick aside about the fact that if you spend some time with that and you learn some skills at rendering with iRay, and really all the stuff that I'm showing you guys, even though it seems like it's geared just toward DAZ Studio and the content world, developing that kind of stuff, all of these skills actually apply to other areas that I work in regularly. Things like gaming and film and stuff like that. And this stuff inside the algorithmic suite, in particular, relates directly to gaming like nobody's business. If you look at the Unity engine and Unreal Engine, both of them now have these great live physics-based renderers that are incredibly fast, incredibly realistic, and they use all the kind of tools and things that we're touching on with the algorithmic suite. In fact, the algorithmic suite of products is kind of designed toward those. It just, we just happen to be fortunate enough that iRay is a physics-based renderer, and so the stuff that you do for in these programs for those game engines also applies to what we'll use it for inside iRay. So the flip side of that is you guys, I hope that that you guys are adventurous and will explore things that you can do with this in all these different avenues, because the skills and things you can pick up from what all I'm showing you actually apply to a lot of different markets, different professional environments, and things like that. So I don't know, I felt like it was something worthwhile to make note of that, because there's some cool stuff that we're sharing here. So anyway, this week's session is kind of loosely titled Substance Painter and Bitmap to Material Workflow. It will actually incorporate Substance Designer to a certain degree as well, because the three are so intertwined, you almost can't use one without using one or two of the others. So, but the focus here is in getting your getting photographs into bitmap to material and then saving that out in a way that's meaningful for use in Substance Painter. And the process to that, just as a quick overview, basically is just loading a photo into bitmap to material. Then once you have it in there, you're going to adjust a number of things about how bitmap to material processes that. Then that's going to generate image maps. That's all that really does, is generates a set of tiling textures, and then those tiles we will load into Substance Designer. Very briefly, this is the reason that Substance Designer isn't even mentioned in the title of this week's session, is because we're actually going to use it so little. Next week we'll be going deeper, real deep, into Substance Designer, because that is a crazy powerful environment on its own. But I'm going to show you today how to get your materials, how to generate materials from photos using bitmap to material, then loading those photos into Substance Designer so that you can link them all up to the proper outputs, and then save out the material assets that can then be loaded into Substance Painter so that you can then paint with those materials. And we're also going to look at a couple of little things, like how to open up some controls on those and make those controls available inside Substance Painter, so that you get a little more of that shader-based functionality inside your painting tools. So let's see. Before we move on, if anyone who is watching was with us last week has any questions or anything you'd like for me to recap before we dig into this, now is a good time to pop those questions into the chat. And if you have any questions that you'd like answered, let's hear what you got. And if once we take care of that, then we'll move forward. Obviously, there's a bit of a delay. I always talk about the little bit of a delay that's in live streaming like this. So I'm going to give that a couple of seconds. And if I don't see any comments or anything come into the chat, then we're going to move forward and start digging into bitmap to material. I feel like I should have like the Jeopardy theme waiting to play when I do that. Whenever I call for a comment or something, so we can have that little music bed. So doesn't look like there are any questions or anything. So we're gonna get to moving. So I like starting off here inside Substance Painter for today, just so you could see this great display, see some photorealistic results that actually work out in real time and are just super cool that way. So let's pop over into bitmap to material. And last week in our introduction and overview of the Substance suite from Algorithmic, we looked a little bit at bitmap to material, and I kind of glossed over some little settings and things to show you guys, yeah, this is generally what's going on. So in preparation for this week, I've put together, I need to go navigate to this. Actually, I thought I had this up. I've put together some resources, some photos that are all pulled from just some Google searches, and then using the Google search. One of the options in your Google searches, of course, is looking for things that are labeled for reuse. So made sure that everything's on the up and up here, so we're good with that. And oh, also, while I'm thinking about it, there should be, if it hasn't been released yet, it will be released any time now, within the next day or so at the most. A really nifty set of texture tiles with Iray setups, with DAZ Iray Uber shader setups for them. that kind of reflect some of what I introduced last week and a lot of what we're doing today. So we've got some interesting substance-related and iRay-related assets to give away as freebies this week and over the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that stuff. It's some pretty cool stuff. So here I have, let's just dock that over here. Here I have my a folder of resources that is just photos that I've pulled together from, like I said, from Google searches. Let's do a quick preview and walk through these because I want to touch on briefly your source images. Okay, when we're creating textures, really for anything, but especially for use in PBR, you're going to look at your source images. Obviously, you want them high res. You want a good level of contrast, but not so much contrast that you have too much darkness in them. You also want to watch for things like hotspots. And it's virtually impossible to get photography of pretty much anything without having a hotspot somewhere. Even if your eyes don't pick it up, there's going to be fluctuations in the light value inside images that are going to yield hotspots once something tiles. So you want to watch for that, but that's also one of the cool things that Bitmap to Material helps us take care of. It has some interesting tools in it for working with that and equalizing the light level in photos before converting those into tiles. So here we'll just take a quick look through some of the photos that I've pulled together. Also, you typically want to pull up photos that are going to be more straight on, like parallel, looking directly at the subject, especially for things like ground, which is what I'm focusing on here today, is textures for ground and bark, because I want to continue with the whole tree. And eventually you guys will get a copy of that tree with a handful of different textures and some other models and things added to it as a freebie. It's pretty nifty. So okay. Sorry, I noticed some comments starting in the live chat. So whenever I catch that out of the corner of my eye, I might pause for a second and take a look. So now here is an example of a photo that's not dead on, but still has a lot to offer for creating a texture. Just because something like this makes for a great large area coverage image, and once it's converted into a tile and we pull some of the stuff out of it that we'll pull with Bitmap to Material, you'll see how powerful that kind of thing becomes. I actually have a pile of these together here, so I hadn't really decided fully which ones I was going to focus on using, but I did want to make sure that I pulled together some photos for you guys to see as kind of the best and worst, in my opinion, or actually mostly the best. Most of these are good. This is actually not that great of an image to use for this sort of thing, but this is a really good one. This is good to a point. It's actually a little on the gray side with the blacks being washed out, but again, we can tweak that stuff. This one is okay, although in tiling, you can see that it rolls away from the, you can see here how the surface rolls away from the camera, so we'll definitely have to pay attention to that if we use that one. So let's go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to show you really the basic functionality of Bitmap to Material. It's crazy simple, actually. It's deceptively simple. Like you can do some stuff with Bitmap to Material very quickly that I mean, it almost makes it just a quick little utility program, but there's also a lot of power embedded in it once you start drilling down. So right off the bat, let's take a look at our outputs, okay? And what these are, at the top of this area, here in our viewport, we have really three areas. You have your workspace over here, which has all of your different channels, all the different operators and things that you're going to use to generate textures from your photos. Here you have the visualization of your outputs. You have the place where your images drop in, and then as you make changes over here, you'll see those changes happen here. And then down here, of course, we have our 3D viewport, which is going to show us the results of this basic shader and the basic tiling and all the stuff that we're doing there. It's going to show us the result of our work here in 3D. And with that, we can also switch that out, I believe. No. I went through this last time, and I actually kind of had a big brain fart on it. This does not have. Maybe it does have an IRA renderer in it. I'm not sure at the moment. It's really weird. There's a slot there for renderer, but right now it's grayed out. So maybe I'll look into that later. Let's start off with this ground image here. And when I drag and drop this, here you'll see I've just got my Explorer window open, and I'm just going to drag and drop this right here, and then hit Load in Main Input. And as soon as that comes in, you'll see we have that image loaded in. And you can see here, that the image it's not a tiling image. So if we zoom in close to the corner here, you can see, where that meets up. So there's a couple of quick things that I want to point out. Right off, we have output size up here at the top of our right-hand menus. And in that output size, that is telling us the size of image maps that are going to be saved out from this. And since the algorithmic suite initially was geared toward video game work, the default value over here is just 512. Now, if we turn that value up, then we'll see our image size over here changes, which we can control our zooming on that right here. Let's just hit fit. Typically, I want to keep it at increments of 25, 50, and 100 so that we have a clear display. And it also will pump up the resolution of what shows on the model, on our sample model in the 3D viewport. So at the moment, this is obviously just a photo on the surface. So the things that we need to do from here, though, are going to be generating these other channels. So if we click on these, you'll see right now, this is what it wants to generate for roughness, metallicity, which we really don't have anything going on with. Here's the normal map that it makes. So we could preview all of these different maps right here. For something like this ground, I'm going to start off here with my outputs and go over looking at the channels that it's going to save out. I really don't need a metallicity on that, so I'm going to turn that off. And you see that goes away up here. These channels displayed up here at outputs reflect the outputs that we have chosen over here. Okay. So we have base color, roughness, normal, height, and ambient occlusion right now. Our diffuse channel, really the way that I like to work with IRA and most PBRs, my base color and my diffuse are going to be the same thing. So I'll just keep base color as my channel there instead of diffuse. Now, if we were going to work with the different shader type, in IRA you have the two different shaders with the DAS Uber shader. You have the ability to switch between one that's driven by metallicity and then a different model that's driven by glossiness or specularity. So if we know that we're going to work with that other shader, then we might want to bring up specular and glossiness. So let's just use let's use glossiness. So we'll turn that on, and now we should get a glossy channel up here. Okay. So now that we've chosen our channels for this ground, let's go into global, and we'll see here that we have a few settings that relate to how this is going to tile. And then here we also have our light equalizer that is pretty nifty stuff. That's going to is really just kind of an automated setting that helps to balance out the light in your image. so that you get a nice flat lit tile that will repeat, smoothly across things without showing a lot of hot spots. So the next thing we need to do is hit make it tile. And as soon as we do that, you'll see that our image on here changes, and we immediately get tiling. Now, how high a quality that tile is can vary depending on a number of factors, and we're going to look at those next. So we have a few different tiling functions in here. There's edges, quincunx. I hate that word. I have trouble with that word. I'm not sure the proper pronunciation for it, so I just call it edges Q. So there's edges Q, linear, edges linear X, and edges linear Y, and then random. So let's take a look at each of these so you can see the differences in what they do. Okay, here's edges Q. Here's edges linear. And you'll see edges linear basically gives us a fade around the edges and then repeats samples from the image so that we get this sort of effect almost as if you're using certain techniques in Photoshop. Then edges linear X does the same thing, but it only applies them along the x-axis. Edges linear Y obviously is going to be the reverse of that. It's going to be those same effects along the y-axis. And then random is probably the one that I would want to use on something like this ground, is going to be random. Because random is actually going to pull kind of random, I think circular or some kind of oddly shaped samples, and then it restamps them back together in a way where the pixels match up at the edges. And so you get this perfect tile out of it that's really pretty cool. Pardon me, I had to cough for a moment there, so I muted my mic. So here we have this set to random. And then let's zoom in. If we turn on tiling transition precision, then you'll start to see some little changes. Some of the changes that you see in this stuff are actually really, really subtle. But there you can see it working around those shapes to blend things in. And then here, if we change the tiling random angle variation, you'll see it turning those different segments that I was talking about. So again, if you had something that you specifically wanted to match up, you could turn that stuff till you see things kind of hit exactly what you're looking for. So that gets our tiling started. So now we need to go through and work with this to build up our different channels. So let's go into relief. And right now our normal intensity is very low. So let's turn that up. And let's go ahead and turn up some glossiness. Let's do roughness from color. Turn that on. And roughness from color is going to do just what it says. It's going to look at the noisiness in there, and it's going to generate a map that looks like this. And that's going to give you a roughness value. Roughness and glossiness. So I really like being able to see the results of these maps in 3D like this while still looking at the map. That's a nice, handy little thing to pull there. Now inside roughness and glossiness, we have other modes we can use. We can pull that roughness from our RGB, or we can pull it from chrominance. A lot of times these aren't really going to make that much of a change. Like in this case, our colors and our lighting are actually really even, so we're not really going to see that much of a change from those. So we can play around with some of these settings here. Let's get some here. If we change that roughness value, you'll see. And then the softness of the roughness is exactly what it says. It's basically going to blur that If we invert that, it's going to become much sharper. So now, to see this stuff really kick in, we're going to need to go into our relief, and we want to pull that from height input. Actually, let's turn that back off. Relief input from height. There's our height map. Okay. A few other things I want to point out very quickly. We can switch through different types of geometry that you can preview things on right here. We could load a specific mesh if we wanted. Then there's a few different material definitions in here, and there's other material definitions that you can download from the algorithmic website. So, for instance, remember how I mentioned the two different versions, the two different modes of the iRay Uber shader, being metallicity based versus glossiness based, and there are two different shaders already in bitmap to material that really kind of correspond to the results that you would get from that. So let's switch our material back out there. We can see sphere. I tend to like the rounded cube, and that's the default. So the materials, lights, of course we can edit all of that stuff. Under environment, if we were to edit this, we could go through and pick different different sky domes that we can then use to view the lighting the way HDRI domes pull that lighting out and they light the scene from the image. We could preview this against different environments and be able to get an idea how it's going to interact with that stuff. So it's very handy. All right. So here you can see what happens if we invert our relief. So you can tell something is happening with that. It's kind of funny, like the more flatly lit your scene is, sometimes the harder it is to tell that you are actually getting a normal map or a relief. So sometimes I'll temporarily turn things off and on like that. Here you can see the normal map being generated from that. Very handy. Okay. And then if I turn my normal intensity, here you can see how subtle or how over the top that normal map is. Right. So now here's the diffuse channel. And this is really handy. You could take the same setup and actually generate a handful of different looks just from playing with this. And there's a lot of tools inside here that are going to look very familiar with anybody, with some passing knowledge of Photoshop. So if we just start working with some of this, of course you'll also notice too that our surface values and things may change a little bit as we alter this, because it is pulling, this is affecting the color as it plays through all these channels and the way this is all interpreted. So let's just keep our luminosity down at 0. Here's hue shift, exactly like you would imagine. It's going to shift you through the different hues. So contrast is one. Maybe it's just a style thing. I have a tendency to try to push my contrast just a little bit. I'll bump things because I want vibrancy a lot of the time. So, and just as we had up in here in global with the light equalizer, you get light equalizer comes back again down here in the diffuse channel, because really if your lighting is off a little bit, that diffuse channel is probably going to be the one that shows it up the most. So here you can see we've got our our light equalizer engaged, and we're pushing these values a little bit, and you can see how it tries to even that stuff out. So right now I'm working with the positive values. Let's look at the negative values a bit as well. Okay. Then let's just turn up diffuse details for a moment. It should sharpen our image just a bit. There we go. Now you can really see that start to sharpen up. Okay. Then any photograph, a photograph of anything is going to have natural, real-world ambient occlusion in the photograph. And sometimes that ambient occlusion, just like light, well, that ambient occlusion is ambient shadows, and those shadows can cause dark spots. You know, instead of hot spots, you get the inverse of that, is these dark spots. And so along with light cancellation, we have AO cancellation. If we turn that up, you should see those shadows and the cracks start to go away. And the nice thing about that is if you want to be able to light an object using these textures, and you want to not have the original lighting from the environment in which the photo was taken affect your renders, then you can create your textures in this way so that you use light equalizer, light cancellation, and AO cancellation to kind of mitigate some of that stuff. You know, you can dial out some of those natural shadows. You know, if we use light cancellation, you'll see that opens up an entire other pile of channels, and that's going to give us the ability to again cut back on the amount of or the intensity of the natural light that we pick up in our photographs. So with something like this, I might use a little bit of AO cancellation, just so I'm not pre-baking too many shadows into it. That way it doesn't conflict with my lighting. But the nice thing about this, though, is you still have ambient occlusion down here, so you can actually generate an AO map. So we can pull the shadows out of our base color and still have those shadows saved as a separate map over in the ambient occlusion. So one of the really cool things about this, and really the nature of what bitmap to material does, is it acts as kind of a suite for image processing. All these different channels and different qualities of photographs, so that you can pull maps out that will control those properties. So let's say you take a photo and you use bitmap to material to cancel the hot spots from the light and to flatten back out and remove as much ambient occlusion as possible. But then you allow the program to also generate an ambient occlusion map and a glossiness map. Basically what you will have done then is separated the highlights that you saw in the real world photography and the shadows that were found from that same photography. You'll be separating the values of those into their own maps. And once those are separated into their own maps, you can plug those maps into shaders and have amazing amounts of control for those qualities of what your surfaces will render as. Okay. So let's now go into our relief again. Maybe push some of this a little bit. We didn't really look at relief as much yet as we probably should. Pinch is kind of an interesting little tool there. If you watch here, watch up on the top, you'll see what pinch does to the way we calculate a normal map. And I would use that sparingly, but it can be useful for causing different types of details to jump out. Okay. Then if we turn up height input softness, I think it's almost a self-explanatory name on that channel. What it's going to do is soften the input going into the normal map, so that instead of having a super crisp, image, you're going to have a softer spread of details. Okay. Let's turn that normal intensity all the way up, because I want this to be a nice bumpy map. Okay. So there we've set up our global, our relief, our diffuse. We've got our settings there. Let's look at our roughness and glossiness. Okay. So here's roughness value, and if we turn that down, just like inside iRay, a low roughness means you're going to have specularity on the surface. The lower the roughness, the closer you get to something being wet. So there it's starting to look almost like wet mud. It's kind of cool. So we can also use some of these other tools here, like roughness from color key settings. Let's just turn some of that on and play around with it just so you can see what this is going to do. Okay, so here you can see as we move that, we're going to be removing some of that specularity and having it generated more from some of the lighter parts of the image. So that's going to allow us to really focus that specularity, those highlights, on raised areas from within that material. Okay. So then let's look at roughness from color value. And this is actually a really neutral image, so we might really not even see a whole lot of change with that. Okay. There you can see, now that I've dialed some things in, you can see the difference that changing those keying modes for roughness will make. Alright, let's see. Roughness variations from softness. Probably won't have a whole lot of an effect right now. So there we've got, it's a little on the wet side actually. I think I want to give it just a touch more spread. And here you can see what our roughness map looks like. And I think it really helps kind of gain an intuitive understanding of what you'll see inside DAZ Studio with iRay when you can work with images in this way and see in real time both a 3D view of how that's going to work out and see what the map does. I think the visual connection made in will help you gain an understanding that really will make it much more intuitive to work with developing your own shaders and surfaces in DAZ Studio, along with obviously creating the tiles and textures and setups that we're going through here. So there's a lot of different things that these tools kind of open up, and ways that I think they can improve everyone's artwork and production abilities that are I don't know, just kind of interesting stuff to pay attention to. If while you're working with something like this, and it gives you these two different ways to see things, if you pay attention to that, then you'll start to develop maybe a little better intuition about what you're doing with those maps, what they're for, where they go. Maybe you can come up with some ideas on different ways to use them too. Alright, so let's dial that back down. Actually, I want to take that right about there. Then if we work with our range here, you'll see what that's doing. And in our image map, the darker areas are the areas that really get the gloss. The white's what's getting kind of flattened out. All right. Let's turn up some softness there so it's not quite so sharp. And I'm pretty good with this. I think that's a good place to stop on that one. So now let's look at ambient occlusion. That's one that I was just mentioning a moment ago. Okay, if we're looking at ambient occlusion, here you can see the mapping that it's generating from that photo for ambient occlusion right now. Just like I was saying, it's going to look at that photo, it's going to look at dark areas, and basically try to extract those. And so we'll have a number of different tools here for working with that. So I like the way this is busted up into low, medium, and high frequencies. So for instance, if we take the low frequencies and turn those down, then we're going to be canceling out the depths. It's going to feel like it has a shallower surface that doesn't reach as deep into our object. If we turn that up, we're going to get much deeper, heavier dark areas, almost a blooming effect for the shadow there. So I want to set that, keep it pretty close to 0 on this one. Now mid frequencies, you'll see just what you probably think that would do. You know, that's going to spread or contract those middle grays, and the effect that we'll get with that, if we spread those, okay, if we spread those, then it's going to create this sort of rounding across our surface and across the shadows. Whereas if we tighten those down, we'll get those sharp, sharp little interpretations and interpolations of the dark areas. So if I wanted this to be very dry ground, for instance, then I might pull those mid frequencies to something very low so that it's going to tighten things in. With the high frequencies, that is obviously that's our high areas, our highlights, our brightness. And so if we push those really high, like if we were to take mid frequencies and go really low, and high frequencies and go really high, then what that's going to give us is this nice sharp delineation between the raised areas and the recesses that's going to be reflected in the ambient occlusion mapping. So, and that's going to give us tight little shadows. So if we wanted tight shadows for craggy ground, that's a good way to go with that. I want something that's a little more all-purpose, so I'm going to dial both of those back down a bit. Then you also have AO Sharpen, which just like it says, it sharpens the image, like running a sharpen mask inside or sharpen filter inside Photoshop. And if we denoise is kind of handy, because denoising is going to go through and take out, like if there's any artifacting in your images, which really you want to try to use images that are high enough resolution and clearly taken so they don't have any artifacting, or as little as possible. But if you happen to find some, once you start processing everything, then AO denoise will help alleviate some of that issue by blurring out those dark areas and helping get rid of some of that artifacting and noise. So I'm going to keep that relatively low, and then map specific radius. Just like it says, it's going to give us a control for the way that it spreads those shadows out into the map. And all these controls give you just so many different ways that you can generate different textures, really just even from just one photo. I'm kind of in love with this program. I think this is so cool. And it's also kind of odd because once you start playing around inside bitmap to material, you can end up losing a large chunk of your life just messing around in here, because it becomes kind of a neat place to play around and just find different looks and explore what all you can pull out of a photo. Sometimes I like to throw a photo in here and just look at how many different tiles and setups I can generate from it, because I know they're all going to have use and all be useful somewhere. So that's just kind of a fun thing to do with it. So let's turn that AO map radius back down and move on into grunge. So if we turn grunge on, okay, then that will open up our pardon me, that'll open up our grunge channels, all the different things that are involved with that. So they have a few different choices in here for how grunge is generated. And let's find, don't remember if I had grunge turned on. Height, normal, glossy. There we go. So I don't really use the grunge settings that much, but if you want to, basically what it's going to do is start introducing some dirt and noise into your channels. That it does just what it says. It's for adding, adding that grunge. You can get this nice dirtiness with it. Let's see. There you can see, really the grunge channel here is affecting mostly the glossiness. So, something that has a high grunge value is not going to be very glossy because it's dirty, has grunginess, has muck on it. Okay. Then advanced just contains a couple of things to help you tweak out your final output. So here you can choose different gamma settings. Most of the time you're going to leave this alone. Most of the time that stuff's going to stay at 2.2 because that's standard color gamma. So here we have preserve input alpha, and again, you're very rarely ever going to mess with that. I think this may actually be the first time I've ever had a reason to turn that on, and even then it really doesn't do much of anything. So then we have all our outputs, and at the point where we've tweaked everything out to where we have a tile that we're happy with, we can see how it's generating all these different materials. I mean, you can just that material right there is so handy. You can apply that across across a plane, and you get a nice ground. You can toss that on a lot of different stuff. So I'm really kind of fascinated with the way this stuff plays out now with PBR and all that, because with Painter we're going to be able to paint with this stuff, but then you could also still just keep the material itself, those texture tiles that are generated from this, and apply those on things. So back in the earlier days of 3D, we used tiling textures a lot, and those became kind of a it used to be that tiling textures were a way to apply color data, color information across a model very efficiently, because it would tile, it would repeat, and so you were able to work with the very low overhead that you needed to have on older computers. Nowadays our computers are so powerful we don't really need that, and so a lot of things open up. Like, you don't really see tiling textures used on clothing that often. There's not a lot of reason for that, and in fact most of the time you want something like that. If you want it to be realistic, you want a painted texture, you want something that's crafted specific to the object, specific to its topology and UVs. However, now we can bring in some of these tiles and use them. They're used a lot in environments and static objects, things like like props and stuff like that. You can bring these back in now, though, with this now that we can generate all these different channels from them, and it's kind of this little renaissance for texture tiles, and that amuses me a little bit. I find it a little bit amusing and kind of cool, because it takes a lot of thought process that used to go into texture tiles from a long time ago, and all of a sudden that stuff is relevant again, but in a very different way. So for any of the folks watching this who maybe have been around the block a few times, maybe kind of come from some old school 3D scanline stuff, like from back in the day, some of this stuff may actually seem a little familiar, and if it does, it's because it should. We're kind of taking one step backwards in some ways so that we can take 2 steps forward, reaching back to use texture tiles again, and then moving forward with it a lot more for using it in a different way to drive all these different channels across different objects and materials and so on. So anyway, I just find that kind of cool. So once you have all of the materials and everything, all your different channels tweaked out in here, the last thing I'm going to do is set my image size. I'm going to boost this up to 2048, and you notice as soon as I do that it hangs for a second. That's because it's going to go through and recalculate everything to that image size. It's going to boost all those image sizes up. It's going to boost the resolution when it tries to display my viewport there, so obviously it's going to create a moment of drag. So as soon as you do that, if it hangs for a minute, don't stress on it. Just let it chug, let it do its thing, and and then we can go in and take a look. And now pushing that up to 2048, you see, we just get some really crazy amounts of textural detail out of that. Okay. So now I want to go up to my upper right hand corner to presets, and actually, where did that go? And I'm going to hit new file, and this should allow me to save this. So a little navigation through my gobs and gobs and gobs of folders. Navigating my machine. Alright, and then I'm going to keep this here. Let's see. Okay, and I'm going to call this Muddy Ground 1. Preface it with CGB because Muddy Ground is kind of a generic sounding name. Alright. And put a little description in there on it. Okay. So now we can see it's the SBPRS is the file format that it saves, and that has saved this bitmap to material setup so that if we have another photo that is similar to this and we want to get the same setup, we can just load this and then change out the photo that it references, and boom, we're able to spit out more of these tiles. So let's see. Also within a preset, we can have within our file, within our SBPRS substance bitmap to material file, we can also have different presets created inside there. So it's actually like a project format. So we could have multiple different setups. We could actually take this photo, do a completely other setup that maybe is a dry ground setup. Maybe do another one that has more shadows, less shadows. You could do this a dozen different times in here if you wanted or more, and then save those all within this particular file, particular project type, and then at any point you can load other photos in place of them, and you've got this nice way of generating all these different tiles very quickly. So the last step in the whole process from bitmap to material is to export our images. So we'll go up here to export bitmap, and this is kind of a rather tweaky little area here. I kind of wish they would change some things about the way this interface works, but here where it says base name pattern, okay, it shows you here what each of these little tags means. So like right now we're going to get images output that have the graph name, which the graph name is what our current file is, or the preset that we're using, and then the output name. So output name is going to be the output channels. So, and then it doesn't just automatically select only these channels when it comes up. All of the channels that are available as outputs will be selected. So you have to go through and turn those off, which I find mildly annoying and kind of, it's like, what was the point of having this over here if you just have to go through it all again? But whatever, that is the case. So let's do, let's go through and do our base color, our roughness, let's see, glossiness, normal, height, You know what, I want to cancel that and also add a displacement to this. Okay. Because a displacement map would be handy generated from that. Now right there is what our displacement map's going to look like. Okay. So we have, oh, and once you set this stuff up in here and save your project again, then this is all set. So let's grab our displacement. And then ambient occlusion. Okay. And I'm going to save these as JPEG files. Under options, we can set if we want any compression, which I don't, so I'll just cancel back out of that. Then let's browse to where we're going to save these. So again, navigating my machine. Alright, here we go. And let's just put these in our textures. And you notice this is going to Texture Tile Collection 2. That's because there's another freebie in the works, much like the one that should be released either today or soon. That'll be a second collection of these tiles using the techniques that you see being shown here. So I'm going to select that folder, and inside there I'm going to make a Muddy Ground 1 folder. So I select the folder, so that's our destination. Our base name is going to be generated from all of this. We're at 2048. Is there anything else I want to change? Anything else? All right, no, we are good. So now I will hit export, and you will see it render out those maps. And then when it's finished, is it finished? Come on. It might still be chugging on something. It looks like export complete. Let's see here. Well, displacement. Interesting. They must have changed something in the latest little update, because for a while there it would actually have a little pop-up that came up and let you and sent you straight to your folder. So let's go to our folder and take a look at the files that has created. So let's go. Navigating my machine. And here we can see the image maps created from this. And it looks like I need to output those again. I don't have my looks like I don't have this named quite right. Let's see, add preset. Let's see. So let's export that and reset pattern. Alright, so let's call this Muddy Ground. Just replace that. So now everything should be called Muddy Ground and should have the output channel name after it. So let's do this one more time. Alright. There we go. So now we have the proper names on everything. So let's take a quick look at these. Ambient occlusion, base color, displacement. It's a little odd to me that the displacement map's coming out so tiny, but I'll look at that a little later. I don't want to eat up a bunch of time with that right now. Okay, so there you can see all of our maps. And just as is, we could take those and plug those into our shaders inside iRay and have a nice tiling shader system that we could apply to a lot of things. I noticed that there is a question in the chat, and I will get to that here in just a moment. because I want to make sure that I don't lose my place where I'm at right now. So the next leg of what we're going to be doing, actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and take that question because really we're about to kick into the second half of this anyway, and this is actually a good point to kind of stop and kind of re-gauge some things. So the question I see is from Reggie Hicks. He says, I have a question. Using a character like V7, using the dials to make modifications, reshape a character to a different looking characters, are those modifications sellable? Okay. Good question. Not part of what we're doing today, but that's okay because this is also I can help you guys out. So if you have any question about anything with this stuff, I'm answering them. Let's see. Let me see the best way to navigate that question. Let's see. Using a character like V7, using the dials to make modifications, reshape your character to a different looking character, are those modifications sellable? Yes, but with caveats. You can, I think, and if I'm wrong, somebody please correct me on this before I have somebody go out and do something that they're not allowed to do. I think you can create a custom property and then ERC all of your dial changes to that property. Then you save that property out as a morph asset, and then a user who has all of the other assets needed that are called by that property you made can use it. I know that you can do that. I don't know what the policy is because I'm normally, if I'm doing a character of some sort, then I'm doing it as an original sculpt. I don't think I've ever done a character the way you're describing doing it, so it's kind of not something that I'm familiar with the policy ins and outs of. Can you do it? Yes, I know you can. Can you sell it? I'm not entirely sure. I can't imagine why not, because if you create it the way I just described, where you're creating a controller and the controller is driving those dials from other people's products, then they have to have the other products in order for what you made to even work. So, you know, if the question is the flip side of that being, can I dial up shapes and then save out that shape and sell that shape where they don't need the other stuff, they just get that shape? No, you cannot do that unless you're doing it using shapes that come from something that was released as a merchant resource and has a specific license for that kind of use. So that I can guarantee you. That will, if anybody catches you doing that, they'll bust your chops on it. So, Nick Silver replies in the chat, says you'd have to list those morphs as required products. Yes, absolutely. If that is the policy and the standard for that, then yes, that's exactly how you'd have to do that. Like I said, it's not something I do, so I don't know from experience. But that sounds to me like the way to navigate that. So let's see. We are past the first hour in, by the way, which is usually where I like to take a 5-minute break to kind of reset my brain a little bit and get a drink, stretch my legs, give everybody a chance for a little potty break. So so this is usually the part where I have to run my dogs outside too. They're usually crying by now. I also, before I take my break, I like to go back through the chat and kind of say hi to everybody. So, see, we've got a few people with us today. I see Silas. Let's see, Silas, Matt Pitts. Let's see who else was there. I like it when you guys are active because then I can say hi to you. Nick Silver is here, which I mentioned Nick just a moment ago. Jay Hudson. Hello, Jay. Let's see. Jay Hudson. Miss V. Miss V is always here. We love you, Miss V. It's always good to have you around. Let's see. Richie Hicks. Brent Bowers is back with us this week. Hello, Mr. Brent. For those who don't know, Brent is a buddy who goes by the name Graybro in the community out there selling stuff. Does some cool stuff. We have some interesting things on deck together. And M Curb, new name to me there. Hi, how you doing? Hope you're digging things. So let's see. M Curb says, I think you're talking about those morphs. I think you'd be able to sell it as a final render, like a commercial for an ad. Check watch some of the programs. Oh, hey, cool. So yeah, guys, it is. We're actually 4 minutes past the first hour in, so I'm going to take a short break. Hopefully, my mic's going to be muted while I do that because you guys don't want to hear any of the grossness that goes on in the background. But let's see. And it looks like you guys have a little bit of a conversation going on there, which is very cool. I love seeing that because this stuff is not about me. This stuff's about you guys. This stuff's about what you guys can do, what you can learn, what you can share with each other, and what I can share with you. So I love it when I see you guys popping off questions and talking to each other and kind of networking with each other and learning that way. That's a very cool thing. I think there's a lot to be had in what we do with these seminars. Just through that alone. So you guys have fun with that for a few minutes while I take a short break, and I shall be right back. Alright, I am back. Somebody make sure that, I think my audio is still good. I have some question about it because of something I hit on my way out of here. So I'm going to review the chat real quick. I had a nice little break there. Eating more granola than a California hippie. Let's see. So, quick review back through the chat. Oh, good. Brent says he can hear me. Well, as long as Brent can hear me. That's what matters. Thanks, Brent. Let's see. Richard Morphs. People sell. Okay, Miss V, Brent. Colonel Sanders says V7 herself is a morph for G3F, excluding material, blah, 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 blah. That's why few products require V7 base. Exactly. Yeah, that's something, it's kind of interesting to me that Daz, went from Victoria being kind of this flagship thing for them forever to really it being just a morph of, of something else. There's lots of times where people will put products out, and it kind of confounds me a little bit how this happened. But they'll say, such and such for V7. It's like, well, if it works for V7, unless you're doing something like unless one of their kits has a specific UV map change, a UV set added, which some of them do. Unless you've made something that's for a specific UV set, everything else should typically work with the G3 base. So really the stuff is for G3 and then supports something on top of it. It confounds me a little bit how things kind of got, turned into what they are with, this is a Darius product or a Michael product, a Michael 7 or a Vicky 7 or a Isabella or whatever, because it's all actually a little on the misleading side, because really all that stuff is still just Genesis 3. So I don't know, it's kind of funny to me, but whatever. Hey, people kind of develop their lingo and how they'll deal with stuff. So not my place to even consider that stuff. I just kind of look at it and go, okay, cool, this is what we're doing, so let's roll. But all that really, I kind of got on almost got off on a tangent there from a comment from Colonel Sanders. Let's see. Silas, wasn't this used a lot in V4's day? Seem to remember having a lot of morphs requiring the Morphs ++ pack. Yeah, I think that was pretty common back then, and it's even more common now. It's actually, I'm pretty sure that blending stuff together like that is very common these days. All right. Let's see. Colonel says, with merchant resources, you can make standalone products with no requirements, if I'm not mistaken. Limba says, yes, but you have to bake these so customers can't extract individual morphs. Actually, Limba, to say you have to bake them is almost the opposite of what you do. Actually, if you were baking morphs, then you're saving out hard geometry of the morph. You're actually with what we're talking about here with that type of distribution, you're not saving out any geometry or even any geometry data. What you're doing is saving a dial that drives other dials. So you're actually using someone else's data. You're telling it what that data will do using a dial that will drive it. So you're giving people the controller that turns on all those settings. You could do the same thing by saving out a pose. You can save out a pose, different kinds of poses in DS that will turn on or off different things. You could go through and save a pose that turns on or off all these different morphs to get a desired shape, and then sell that. It's just a pose. There's absolutely no question that you can do that. So the only difference between that and what we've been talking about here for the last few minutes is that the method that I described here and what we've been discussing is creating a dial that does it instead of having necessarily a pose that turns the stuff on or off. So Let's see. Limba says, I think all characters based in G3F have the same UV. Actually, they don't. I know that for a fact, because one of the things that I really like in Daz Studio is you can load in new UV sets for things, and there's a lot of reasons why you would want to do that. Sometimes, you may have. There's a lot of reasons. I could go on a long rant about that, a long diatribe over why that's a great thing to have. But it also means that sometimes the people creating the larger, kind of base character kits that get promoted, for whatever reason, whether it's their production methods or whether there's a lot of different reasons you might end up needing to create a different UV set with some slight tweaks somewhere. And so when those get put out, then the maps that go out with those kits correspond to that UV set and not the default G3 UV set. So, and it's something that does break a little compatibility from time to time, but at the same time, it also gives us as creators the ability to make some really deep, important changes to things that might better facilitate the kind of content that we want to create. So, there's a give and take with that sort of thing. So, let's see. And Matthew Pitts says, if you want the desired or the advertised appearance of a figure that requires something other than a G3 base, you need the required figure. It's funny, you guys will hear me, if you listen when I'm talking about this stuff a lot of times, you'll very rarely hear me refer to that kind of stuff as a figure. I'll refer to it as a kit or a character. Like V7 is a character. She's a character for Genesis 3. She's not a figure because the figure is Genesis 3. Just like if you were to make a giant morph that overhauled something on my Cthulhu figure. Well, Cthulhu's the figure. What you made that changed it into a new character is a kit or a character pack. Something like that. So I think it's, I think almost every session I end up discussing a little bit about terminology somewhere, because in the course of this community and market, there's a lot of language that we use that tends to cloud things oftentimes a little bit. There's things that I think if we refer to them a little differently at times, we could clarify our communication, and a lot of things would actually make more sense, especially to new people. Somebody new to this says, oh, I got the Michael 7 figure, but that's not necessarily a figure, and all kinds of stuff like that. And I talk about that stuff semi-regularly because it's such a big thing. Communication, especially when because I assume everybody watching this is probably interested in being a vendor, being a professional at this, or even just semi-professional at this. And when you get into this stuff on that level, where you're doing it that way, you're going to find communication may be the single biggest issue in all of this. Whether it's between you and your customers, or you and the store you sell through, you and people testing, communication is vital, and it's very opaque in doing this stuff because there's so many different terms that, depending on how you look at it, could mean different things. It's how people apply that can be very confusing. So it's why I actually go off on that kind of thing quite a bit. Let's see. Reggie asks, Les, is Scarlet your original character in Daz Studio? Original figure, I might say. Figure. If it's a character, I think of that as an add-on. But Scarlet, your original character in Daz Studio ready? Or is she Daz Studio ready? I have a build of her for Daz Studio, but for a lot of reasons, I haven't released that anywhere yet, and honestly, I'm not entirely sure that's ever going to get released. So I hate to say that because she was my baby. I worked on her for a long time, along with her companion Jonathan, that I never even released the poser build of him, let alone a DS version. But yeah, there's some things about it that I'm still not sure. I'm still on the fence, and I don't want to get into kind of the back end of things, the business. There's a lot of things that happen. There's kind of a point you get to in this stuff where you start to work with things in this business kind of way, and you work with different businesses involved in this. And without saying anything untoward about anyone, you know, sometimes things don't work out the way you plan. Sometimes things kind of go a little sideways here and there. It's life. It happens. But you know, for that reason, you know, Scarlett never quite got the launch that I really felt like she should have gotten. There were a number of missteps taken in that, and I fully admit those, and I hate that, because I think it really stunted what, you know, the character's reach in the market, which then stunted a lot of things that we could achieve with it. So, you know, moving forward with things, I eventually embraced Genesis 3, in part. Probably the biggest just personal artistic reason that I embraced Genesis 3 was once I started looking at it, I realized, and I actually talk regularly with some of the guys who made Genesis, and work on that end of things at Daz, and we kind of joke around about how when I was working on Scarlet and some of the things they were adding to Genesis and some of the things they were planning for the future, you know, it's like great minds think alike. Not that I'd say I'm great or anything, but great minds think alike, you know, the old phrase. And it's like we had some of the same design specs in mind. So then I start looking at Genesis, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you know, they did this. It's kind of like this that I did with Scarlet, and this is this, and this is this. And okay, cool, yeah, we all had the same sort of thing in mind. My entire impetus for Scarlet initially was to have a figure that could accomplish certain things that hadn't been done in Poser yet. And, you know, Genesis is kind of the same thing. Genesis 3 especially is to have a figure that accomplishes things that you can't do in Poser. It doesn't do them in Poser because it's in Daz Studio. And once I kind of, you know, combine that with iRay, it just became very apparent. It was like, okay, yeah, this is where I need to go. So anyway, yeah, you know, that's kind of the thing. You know, there may be some sort of future life for Scarlet and Scarlet related content, but you know, I don't have a crystal ball on that at the moment. I've got a lot of different ideas, but you know, I have tons of ideas on a lot of different things, and I get my irons in a lot of fires, so it's hard to say what's going to happen with any of that kind of stuff. So, let's see. Oh, Terry, the screen's not frozen. I'm just kind of talking right now and answering questions and stuff. So it's not frozen. It's just there's not a lot going on screen right now, mostly verbal. So, let's see. Curb says, wish someone would do in-depth animation how-to videos as deep as these CGBytes videos get. I am intensely interested in doing animation videos, and it's something we may put on deck in the future. Let's see. Reggie Hicks. Let's see. Scarlet. Okay, that was the Scarlet question. Curb says, just want to make videos to go with music. I tend to get deeper in the nuts and bolts of everything, so here I am. Let's see, Matt Pitts. Okay, cool. Cool. M. Curb says, when will they come up with characters that interact with each other's geometry easily? Seems like making characters hold hands or kiss is unbelievably difficult. You know, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. There are a lot of little things that go into, especially in animation. Like it's kind of funny. I've done some seminars here for CGBytes on posing, and I'm probably going to do some more on posing because it's a very frequent subject that comes up. But posing is really your first step toward animating, because you're going to set poses at keys and so on. And there are some little things to keep in mind when you are trying to do that kind of stuff, and that's a pretty big topic. It's a large topic for us to dig into sometime, and you know, maybe we'll toss that out there as a suggestion, see if folks bite on it, and if there's If they CGByte on it, haha, I had to go there. I'm sorry, guys. And see if people are interested in that, and if so, then maybe it's something we'll bring up. I would enjoy bringing it up because I love animating. Animation is kind of why I got into all this 3D business forever and a day ago anyway. So, and it's just funny that actually the majority of what we do isn't getting animated at all. You know, I do animation tests for almost everything I make, so it's kind of funny. So let's see. All right, so I think that kind of feel like I've kind of caught back up on the chat. So, which actually spent a little longer doing that than I intended to. We need to jump back in here now and move on to the next leg of today's session. And that is going to be moving these texture tiles into Substance Painter. So we're going to be using Substance Designer as an intermediary for that, because you can't just take the tiles straight into Substance Painter and use them. I mean, you can load them in as textures, and that's fine. You can load them in as image maps to be used in different ways. But really, that's not the way that this stuff is intended to be used in Painter. It's certainly not the most powerful way to use it. The most powerful way to use it inside Painter is as a material. So in order to do that, we need to set that up inside Substance Designer, which is where we are going to next. Okay, so here we are inside Substance Designer. And you can see right now I have a graph up that I was working on earlier, actually generating some leaves. And I'm going to save that. Actually, I'm going to save that for another day. So at the moment, I want to generate a new substance. Okay, and we're going to have this. When you generate a new substance, you pick the graph template or shader model that you want it based on. So it's kind of interesting. Inside Substance Designer, we can build these materials based on whatever sort of setup you want. You can even make your own templates, graph templates to go in here if you have something custom. It's really powerful stuff. I mean, it's actually way more powerful than I can cover today. I'm going to touch on a lot more of that next week and really dig deeper into Substance Designer next week, because man, you could spend a lot of time in here. It's really cool, crazy powerful. So what we're going to do is start out with a physically based material, and I'm going to call this Muddy Ground 1. Actually, let's do CGB. I like having prefixes on things so that it's easy to find and easy to search things out. So you'll notice here that in our graph outputs, this does not have our ambient occlusion. We'll be adding that in manually, which is a nice thing because then it gives you a look at creating some nodes inside here. It's a nice little preview to what all we're going to be doing next week with all the craziness that can happen in here. So let's hit OK. And so now we have a new, a new unsaved package. And as we have this package in place, let's go ahead and take a quick little tour through the interface of Substance Designer. Okay, obviously you have your file menu up at the top like every other program under the sun. There's that. The things to really take note of in here are, there's some viewport controls up here that do a few different things that we're not going to be touching on today. Excuse me. We'll get into more of that stuff next week. Here you have just a quick zoom view for zooming in your graph. All of these guys across here are different functions that you can apply to different nodes inside your graph, and you can also get to a full, readable, non-abbreviated version of that menu by holding the space bar and just going in there and dragging things out. So down here we have our texture preview, similar to what you saw in Bitmap to Material, and here we have our 3D view, which again is the same as in Bitmap to Material, although this 3D view also offers us a live iRay preview, which can be pretty nice. I'm not going to use that today because it does slow things down just a touch, but it's a very cool thing to have there. So like I said, we're just going to use this as kind of an intermediary program to get this stuff into a material format that we can then take into Painter. And the way that we'll do that, okay, is we will come back over to our Explorer, and I'm just going to drag over all of these images and drop them. I'm going to import resource. That way whenever we save all of this out, it'll be embedded in the material package that it saves. Okay, I'm going to load all of these in and hit OK. Give that just a moment to process. So while that is chugging on those textures, I'll glance back over at the chat for a moment because I saw some activity still moving there. Let's see. Alright, so now that we have our images loaded in, when we load them in this way, you will notice that they don't get a clean name on them. They all just say bitmap. So that's just something to kind of take note of. And I'll just pop back over and reference. They'll come in the order that you see them here. So the top of our list is actually going to be that ambient occlusion, which we don't have an output channel for. So that's going to be the one little bit of work, actual factual work, that we're going to do inside here, really. Everything else is just hooking things up. So let's right-click, add node, or we can just hit spacebar and add node. We don't want to add an output node. And what an output node does, just as if we pop over to bitmap to material, we have these outputs listed here. Okay, for all of these outputs that we have here, we need an output node that's going to sit at the end of the chains in our material file. Okay, so here we have a blank output node because it isn't labeled with anything. So let's go ahead and call that ambient occlusion. And we could write in descriptors and labels and stuff if we want. Let's copy and paste that into our label at least. Okay. And then we need to set its usage. So we're going to add an item to usage, and then in this drop down we're going to go down to ambient occlusion, and that's going to tell this shader how this channel works, what this channel is for. So there we can see we have our label on there. Let's see. I thought there was some place in here to find labels on these image maps, but I don't know. I'll have to go digging around for that. I actually don't pay that much attention to that very often, so but we'll just drag from the dot here to the input, the output dot to the input dot, and you'll see we create a wire. Okay, and if we want to see the results of this down here, we need to have it able to view in 3D space in the 3D view. So we'll hit view in 3D view, and then we assign the channel that we want it to affect. So now that's affecting our ambient occlusion. So if I make my view larger, now we can see we have ambient occlusion displaying on our surface. Okay, so next we're going to hook up our base color. Okay, and then let's see, which map was this? I think that's probably displacement. Yes. Okay, it's displacement. So let's add a displacement node. There we go. Let's call this one displacement. We'll copy that and place that in our label. And you don't even really have to start with any of these nodes in place. You can start with a completely blank graph and just create the nodes you need as you need them. Okay, so there's that. And then let's view in 3D view. I don't think we actually have a means yet. It won't do a live display of displacement. It just kind of sits there. So then we have, what was next? That should be gloss. Okay. And I'm actually going to plug my glossiness into the roughness channel. Right. Then we have our metallic, which we don't need. Then height. Yep. And then normal map. Normal map makes all the difference. That really is the one that causes everything to come together. And I actually want to plug, I'd forgotten that I had a roughness map here, sorry. I want to plug that into my roughness channel, and then let's create a channel for gloss. So output, and then, where's that at? Glossiness, there we go. Alright, and then plug that in, view in 3D, and there might not be, let's shove that into specular level. Okay, so that's all this little shader network is going to look like for now. Because we're not going to do any of the crazy stuff with this. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with this that'll actually make it even more interactive over in Painter. I do want to add a couple of things to it just so you can see some of the options that we'll have, and you'll see here too how close this looks to what we have in bitmap to material. Okay, they're extremely close. There might be a slight difference just because of the way I set a couple of those channels up, but it is remarkably close. And so that is what we're going to get when we paint with this if we save this out right now. Now I do want to add a couple little pieces of functionality to it because it's kind of part of the nature of using Substance with Painter. And this is more of just kind of a preview here. And I'm going to do this with the, let's do this with the ambient occlusion. Okay, so if I select this wire and then I hit level, that's going to give me a Photoshop style levels command. And with that selected, I have that command open over here. And then if I drag any of these controls, you'll see how it affects that channel. I like that one because it's a good example. It's a good place to just look at this and see this in action. Okay. And then once we have something like that in place that can offer us some ability to edit things, we can then go into the values for this and make some of these available to Painter. Okay, let's go back to histogram there. So let's right click on this and then expose parameters. Okay. And so here we're going to take our level in low, level in high, and level in mid, and make all of those available. Okay. And then I like to put a prefix on it so I know this is my ambient occlusion. Okay. And so now these controls, you see how now they're in red over here. Those will be available and will show up as editables inside Painter. Okay. So at this point, we are ready to save this package. So I'm going to go to my Explorer and right-click, Save As. Okay. And I'm going to save this one as CGB Muddy Ground SBS. And then after I've saved it, I will publish it. And when I hit publish, that's going to let me create an SBSAR file. Okay. So let's hit OK, and that's going to collect those textures together, those image tiles together, and store those right alongside all the shader information we just created. So it usually takes it a moment to push through saving that stuff. So we'll just give that a minute to chug. Chug, chug, chug. All right. And I actually want to make a couple quick changes that I noticed here while that was saving, just so we can, we'll do that and then resave it. Something to keep note of inside Substance Designer, there is a size clamp on here, and this sets what the image size is going to be. It actually resizes your images, your image tiles on the fly for when this is being used inside Painter. So right now, if we loaded this into Painter, we'd be actually just working with a 256 by 256 texture. Now, just as in bitmap to material, when we changed that value, if you recall in the last hour, in bitmap to material, we changed our output size up here, and that changed the size that it would save out our tiles at. In Substance Designer, this is very analogous to that, in that it's changing the size of the images as we work with them. So what we're going to do is come here to parent size, and we're going to set this to 2048. And we can actually change that value inside Painter as well, but I like to have it at a relatively high resolution for when I start, just because, I don't know, I just kind of do. Although if I test it and I notice that it reacts sluggishly, like if you get into a really complex network and you have a high value in that parent size, then when you load that material into Painter to use it, it's going to, well, it shouldn't say it's going to, it runs a high risk of reacting very sluggishly. And so if you have those dialed down, then you can kind of work with how much resolution you're pushing at any given time with that, so that you can kind of optimize your workflow so it actually has some responsiveness. So Miss V over in the chat says she's got to go. See us next time. We'll see you, Miss V. It's always good seeing you. So so let's change those to 2048, and I will save that package again, and then we're going to publish the package one more time. So we'll let that sit and chug for just a moment. And then once that is saved out, we're going to switch over to Substance Painter, where you'll get to see the results of this applied to the model and applied as we paint inside with that really cool render setup, which is super, super sweet. That's like the end goal. So there we have all of that saved out. So now let's pop over to Painter. Yay, back to Painter. Woohoo. So I'm going to turn off a couple of my display settings here first. Let's turn off actually, let's just turn off all of our post effects. Maybe not all. Actually, it's just so ugly when you turn those all off. Let's turn off the color correction. Let's turn off the depth of field. How about tone mapping? We want that on or off? Might tweak it. No, let's keep it right there. Okay, and yeah, we want anti-aliasing on, definitely. All right, so just there we go. Let's turn that environment opacity down just a little bit. adjust that exposure. And if we rotate our environment, there you actually get probably one of the best examples of what HDRI domes are really supposed to do. I love that. I love being able to see that. It tells me so much. Okay. So now I want to take that muddy ground. I do feel like I still have way too much going on here. Let's turn down my shadow opacity a little bit. And then so debatable sometimes. Here, we'll just kill all that stuff for now. Let's turn it all back on so it's there when I want it, and we'll just turn it back off for now. So here we're operating very brightly at the moment. So let's take you on the quick tour through Substance Painter now. So across the top of the screen we have a variety of tools, some of which are probably not exactly the most intuitive things you've ever seen. But so if we mouse over any of these, you'll get a little pop-up that tells you what it is, which is handy, and I encourage people to always look at these programs and look for that. Most programs you're going to use are going to have that in them. So, take a moment. You see something, you're like, I'm not entirely sure what that is. Put your mouse over it. Let it sit there and find out. Here we have two links, one to the Substance Share website and another to the Substance Source website. Both are crazy awesome freaking piles of resources that you get access to when you're using the algorithmic suite. I highly encourage going and poking around there. And for production use, I mean, I got an email this morning that they just added like 1,000 new materials or some ridiculous number. I mean, there's just so much stuff up there that you can just go grab and pull down and use, and their library of stuff available for users of their programs is growing all the time, and you can contribute to it. So, it's also a nice little way, just kind of get your name out there in some other circles and things like that. It's like if you make some cool substance materials and things using these tools, you can save those out and upload them there and share them with that whole community. It's kind of a cool thing. So here we have our paint tool. There's paint and then there's physical paint. Physical paint is a little different. It's like spraying paint at the model, and it hits and flows and interacts with the normal map and does some cool things that way. Then eraser is the same way. There's regular eraser and then there's physical eraser. Then you have this projection, which I honestly I haven't used that for anything yet. I haven't even played with it hardly. I'm going to show you guys really the functionality that I primarily use inside here today. So let's see. Then clone tool. Really handy for just like in Photoshop for stamping things different places. Most of this stuff is very self-explanatory. This is not a symmetrical model, so I'm not really worried about this right now, but there is the ability to paint symmetrically. And then there's also the rendering, which will bring up iRay, and we'll get a true iRay render of whatever we have in the viewport. So that's pretty cool. Let's get on into the actual functionality, as we have just a little over 10 minutes left in today's session. So what we want to do is bring in our newly made material. Okay, so over here in my shelf, and the shelf in Painter is really where there's three different places things are going to happen most. I mean, obviously painting in the viewports, I'm not counting that. But the shelf is where you're going to have all your content that you can pull from. Any materials you make, any materials you download, all that stuff's going to go into materials. There's also materials, quote unquote, if you can see my fingers, there's some air quotes going on here. There are things we can make inside Substance Designer that aren't just materials. They're actually more like painting with Photoshop effects. and they do some crazy stuff. We're going to get into that in the future. But all that kind of stuff you'll find over here in your shelf. This is where all your cool little tools and doodads and goodies for actually painting can be found. Then your layers, you have your layers palette, which is very similar to Photoshop, with the exception that, think of it this way, Photoshop, you're working with your diffuse layer for a shader, or you're working with just one channel. In here, you're working with however many channels you actually tell it you want, and these are the ones that are here by default. So, so that's pretty cool. Let's see. I do need to add an ambient occlusion channel in here. And I'm hoping I remember where that's at. Let's see. Normal. I don't want to select an ambient occlusion map. I want to add that texture. Here we go. Channels. Ambient occlusion. There we go. So now, here we have ambient occlusion. So that's under texture set settings. And you'll see how as soon as I added that, any of these materials that I already have in place to start with in here that have ambient occlusion in them, now that's reflected in our viewport. So it's kind of interesting too. Any channel data that is in a material, but maybe you don't have the channel in place in your layers to start with, once you add that, it will still look at those materials and go, oh yeah, that had this, you've added that to it, now boom, let's see it. And it'll pop it right in there. So it's super cool. Over here we have our menu where we do most of our editing of brushes, materials, all that kind of stuff. And this is this actually kind of changes depending on what you have selected. You'll see different things available here in the bottom half of this. So like if I click on material here, then we can choose different material for the layer that we're on. So at the moment I want to go ahead and turn off all my layers. So we're down here at just a base blank white. And in my materials shelf, I'm going to hit this little button right here for importing resources. Okay. Then I'm going to hit add resources. And let's go navigate. Another little tour through Les's computer. CGBytes, seminars, substance. And then we want to go here into our substances, and I'm going to grab muddy ground. We'll give that a minute to load up. Grab the wrong one, I think. There we go. And once that's loaded, I need to define what that is. So we're going to define that as being a base material. And I'm going to import this into my current session. If I import it into shelf, it'll actually put a copy of it in the shelf directory that the program looks at. And there are some ways that you can tweak your preferences so that you can control where it looks at all those assets from. For right now, I'm going to leave everything default. Most of the time, I just do things per session. So let's go, or I can load it per project, which isn't a bad idea here. Let's load that into our project, large craggy tree that I have open. So now we'll hit import and give that just a moment. Hopefully I didn't save that out with the texture so large that it doesn't want to preview, because that's something I've ran into a few times that can be kind of irritating. So now that we have that material loaded up in here, there's a couple of different ways that we can use it. The first kind of fast run and gun easy way to use a material is to start a fill layer, and that's also a good way to introduce you to how this stuff works and what it's going to do. So over here in our layers menu, you can see we have add a layer, and then we have add a fill layer. We could also right click and get to any of this stuff where you can actually read it. So let's add a fill layer. And then when we add that fill layer, we have the ability to put that in material mode just by putting a material in there. So if we drag this material, now we have that material that we made loaded onto the object in our scene. I still feel like my viewer settings are a little screwy. I feel like that's displaying very very brightly, like way more brightly than it should. So let's just let's look at that for the moment. Okay, let's go back to our display settings. These are all turned off. Let's turn that color profile off. I had a color profile turned on, which is kind of nice. Those color profiles can do some interesting things just for your display and giving you a way of looking at things. So here you can see we have our texture, and all our textures are inside that shader, and now that shader is applied to this object. But all these details, I mean, these are grasses. They should be tiny, right? So why are they so large? Well, the reason they're so large is the primary control you have for working with the size and scale of your texture tiles on the objects inside Painter is right here under UV scale. There's also the fact that this model has UV coordinates generated for it, and it has a few different UV shells, and so by default we can see where we're going to see seams. So we don't want that, obviously. So what we'll do is we'll change from UV projection that's using the model's native UV coordinates. We're going to change that to triplanar projection. So when we change that, you'll see it actually is projecting now and blending from 3 different directions so that our textures go on perfectly no matter what. So if you're familiar with projection, with UV projections inside a program like Maya or some of the other programs folks use, then this will be very intuitive, because a triplanar projection just looks at, you know, X, Y, and Z as planes and then shoots UVs on there. And what Algorithmic has done with this is they've taken that concept and done it in such a way that those blend with each other wherever they meet, lapping around an object. So it allows textures to blend in a way that's very seamless. It's really cool. We still have the issue, though, of the scale. The scale of our tiles is really large on here. So what we can do is just grab that UV scale, and if we increase the UV scale, then we'll decrease the size of the texture on the model. Okay. And also you'll see this is showing up relatively low resolution in here. So we can change that in our texture set settings. So remember I said that we could bump that up. So now if I take that up, it should become a little more crisp. You have to give it a moment, though, because the program has to rifle through that material and all the stuff that's in it and then recalculate. So now you see we get a little more clarity out of that if we turn that up. I'm going to turn it back down, though, so that we keep a nice fast interaction. Okay. So that's one way of applying a material across an object, just using the fill layer and then putting the material in. You can also turn off and on what aspects of the material, what channels of the material that you want to use. Here you can see we have color, height, roughness, metal. See, metal is grayed out because there's no metallicity information in the shader, so that's grayed out by default. If we turn normal off, then we're going to be turning off the normal map. Turn off height. See, here we can turn off all of these different maps and just see one thing at a time. Okay. Then, let's see. Then remember those channels we made exposed on the levels command in our AO. Well, here we have where we can edit those. So now if we wanted to increase or decrease our AO levels, we can do a lot of stuff with that in here. And that should all kind of ripple through. And then here, if we bake any of that stuff out to maps, we can actually operate on one channel at a time just by selecting the channel inside our layers here. Okay. Also, if I leave this in place, I could change out what material we're looking at on here at any point. So, like right now, if I wanted, I could click where it says material mode, and I could go in and choose a different material, or I could just drag a material from our shelf onto that section of our editor. So the next thing that I would do, looking at this, I would need to kind of tweak it out. Let's make this a little tighter pattern on here. Of course, you're going to start to see some of that patterning. So the next thing we need to do is add some breakup. And the way I would do that is by creating a paint layer, okay? And now that paint layer should still have the same material added to it that was selected here. Whatever the last material you had selected will be the material that you're operating with next as you go in. So now let's take our paintbrush and we'll increase the size on that brush, and we can paint on that layer. And now you'll see we're able to paint with the same material that's filling it in that fill layer, and start to add a lot of breakup. So then, all that patterning and repetition gets knocked out. And you could just take a blank fill layer and just paint straight into it too if you wanted. Another function of having this paint layer there, though, that I like quite a bit, is if we right-click, we can go down and add other things to these layers. We have filters we can add more paint in different ways, fills, levels, all kinds of cool stuff. So let's add a levels command to this layer. And here you can see now the stuff that we painted in, we're using the same material, but now we're tweaking its levels like this. Okay. And there's all kinds of other stuff we could add. Like if we added a generator, okay, that generator, there are different materials inside Substance Painter called generators that generate things like dirt, fibers, all kinds of different stuff. And those are really there. I would encourage you to explore those and experiment with those. That is how you apply them, though. You right-click and go down and select any of those. There's filters you can add. Like if we add a filter here, let's go grab the, let's see, let's grab this one, hue, saturation, and lightness. So let's say we wanted to really pump up those colors. Of course, I've added that to this paint layer. If I wanted, I could also add that to the fill layer that's using the same material below it. So let's add a filter there. Let's do the same filter, and this one, let's bump its saturation and then maybe its lightness. Let's bump that up a little bit, and then move the hue. Let's move the hue a little more to green. Of course, this is a little extreme of an example, but gives you an idea just how that stuff works and how you can play with it. So there's a few other things I want to show you before we call this a day. We want to add some masking so that I can take our original textures that we had on here and have them still show through. So let's take let's turn this top layer off, this painted layer. It doesn't really need any masking because it's just painted wherever we touched with the brush, so that's going to be in place. So we need to add some masking for a fill layer. So let's right click that and we'll add a black mask, which is basically going to hide everything there. Okay. And now if we paint into that layer, we'll be painting into its mask, just like painting into layer masks inside Photoshop. And then from there, we could use any of the different brushes. Let's go to our shelf and grab a brush. And we can use brushes that have all kinds of different effects and different approaches to how they work. Let's grab this guy, and you'll see how that just sprays out. And so we're able to paint with that. Let's turn that layer above it on. So now we're just painting right on through. Painting. And so all of that texture you're seeing there was generated from one photograph. Now that is, to me, that's really super, super cool. So let's go back to that top layer now and maybe take an eraser and erase out some things. Just use that as a means of kind of blending some of this stuff in. Okay. And we could choose different brushes for our eraser too, I believe. Let's, there we go. Just erase that back out over those roots. Or we could also apply a white mask and then paint with black into that to reveal bits of it. Then the brush settings, the next thing I want to show you, we're actually starting to run over on time. But in the brush settings, a lot of this is very analogous to what you would do inside Photoshop. So here I just changed the spacing on that brush. Okay. So there we have all that texturing done. And we could go through and change out any of this stuff just by changing the materials that are in these layers. That's really pretty handy. Very cool stuff. So let's take a look now. Where did I want to go from here? The next thing I want to do is turn back on my my nicer display settings. So let's go into our viewer settings, turn our environment opacity back up, and let's see. Let's maybe take a different environment map. Okay. So cave entry in forest. That ought to be a good one. Kind of appropriate for this. Okay. So let's turn its opacity back up. Reset that exposure. Rotate around the object. Here we can kind of see it in an environment a little more natural to its to what it is. It's kind of handy. Okay. Turn those shadows opacity back up. I'm going to zoom in. And let's turn on the display settings. Let's turn our active our post settings back on. Okay. So now that we have those post settings on, you start to see something that's really quite photorealistic. You see the results of all those shaders and everything as applied through the brushes and painted into your object. Let's turn on our color profile, and we really start to tweak things out quite a bit. Let's tame down that aperture a little bit. There we go. The color profiles, they are exactly what that says. It's a color profile. It defines the things like white point, things like that in the lighting. Similar again to a lot of things that you'll find in the tone controls, tone map settings of iRay inside Dash Studio. And these are really just here as a preview. So actually here's where you can control the white point on that, just like in Dash Studio. So if we reset that back to the default, we can play around with that stuff and take a look at it a little bit further. Let's go back to our exposure. swing our camera around that a bit. And really what that color profile does is it sets up a almost like a color graph that your white point moves through, and that's how you know how that's going to where that's going to affect. So if you could look at that little image map right there, it really is just like a color wheel, and your white point is cycling through that color wheel. So once you have results that you're satisfied with, then from there the last thing to do is go to File, Export Textures, and it will always try to put in the numerical value that it designates to whatever shader is on your model. So your naming in here will be whatever the model name is, and then that number, and then it'll have names for each of the maps there. So I'm going to save these out at 4096. So I can work in here, like at the moment I'm working at 2048 so that it's more responsive to my machine. But when I output, I can go to 4096 or even 8K maps, and it will reinterpolate all of that stuff when I save it out. Now it does take it a minute, so I'm not going to go ahead and hit that right now because it'll just kind of bog everything down, and you know, really it's just saving out a file, so that's not that big of a deal. But right here, if you click in this field, you can set where your file is going to output to. Here, of course, is your file formats, your bit depth. And then this common padding is dilation plus transparency, what I have mine set to. What that is say this model, it has UV shells to it, and that padding is how far it's going to spread the results of these materials past the edges of those UV shells. So that way you have less likelihood of having seams show up because it's basically an overpaint. So actually, let's go ahead and save this out. It might not even take it all that long. So let's toss this out there. Let's see. Tree 1. And let's call this large craggy tree 2. Select my folder and export. So there are so many different things that you can do inside Substance Painter. I mean, there's really no way that one session with that is going to give you all of it. But if you go back and you watch everything we've done today, really the task that I set out to show you was how we could take photos into bitmap to material, then set up a material out of that inside Substance Designer, and then take the results of that and use it inside Substance Painter. So that's really the focus of everything that we've gone over here, and if you watch back through, you'll see that it really does that. I would encourage you to take some time to experiment with all these tools. Substance Painter, incredibly powerful, has a lot of stuff under the hood that hopefully we'll get to in the future, and same with Substance Designer. Both of those are just insanely powerful tools. So I hope you guys have enjoyed what I've shown you here today. I hope you pick up some cool stuff from it. Those of you who are already using the algorithmic suite, don't be shy. Don't hesitate to show me the results of what you do with it. Those who haven't, I hope that this kind of gives you some more food for thought and maybe taking the plunge into that. I think it's like $20 a month for all 3 programs in the suite. It's so worth it. So worth it. Work that I've already done using it, you know, just for a couple of months has more than paid for probably my first year of having it. I mean, I'll probably just go ahead and pay the rest of it off soon and finish that out because it's just that valuable. So there you can see we've output our textures from this, and this will, let's do a quick preview of this so you can see these. There is the results that it outputs out of Painter from all of that cool material workflow that we did. And so now those maps are ready to be taken into DAZ Studio or anything that has a physics-based renderer and applied as needed. So that's going to bring us to a close for this week's program. I want to thank everybody for being out, hanging out, talking, and all that kind of cool stuff. Always good to see you guys with us. Thanks to Terry and Jason and the folks at CGBytes, as always, for putting these things together. So for anybody who might be joining us who doesn't know, I'm Les, also known as 6S1 Media, and yeah, it's been very cool. I hope you guys dig this stuff, and so keep an eye out. I think Terry does it. Pretty sure she does. Terry should have a nice set of PBR tiling textures with some material stuff as a freebie for you guys. If not right now, it'll be, if it's not ready for release right now, it should be out soon, because I know we were going back and over some stuff with that earlier today. So anyway, thanks again to everybody for being here, and I will catch you guys next week.